The rain hammered against the concrete walls of the abandoned factory like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller fragments that caught the dim light filtering through broken windows. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pressed her back against the cold metal of a rusted shipping container, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins like liquid fire. She had been in worse situations before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, everything that could go wrong had gone spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. 3 hours earlier, she had been part of Alpha Team, an elite special operations unit tasked with infiltrating the Blackwater Syndicate's primary weapons depot. The mission was supposed to be a simple in-and-out operation. Extract intelligence, plant tracking devices on the weapon shipments, and disappear into the night like ghosts. The kind of mission her team had executed flawlessly dozens of times before. But simple had become complicated the moment her communication equipment died. Maria touched the side of her helmet where her radio should have been crackling with updates from her team leader, Captain Rodriguez. Instead, she heard only the hollow silence that had followed her discovery that her entire communication array had been fried by an electromagnetic pulse device hidden somewhere in the facility. She was completely cut off from her team, operating blind in hostile territory with no backup and no way to call for extraction. The Blackwater Syndicate wasn't just another criminal organization. They were a sophisticated network of former military personnel who had turned their skills toward illegal arms trafficking. Their compound was a fortress built inside what appeared to be a derelict industrial complex, complete with motion sensors, thermal cameras, and enough armed guards to stop a small army. Intelligence suggested they had at least 50 operatives on site at any given time, all of them trained killers with military-grade equipment. Maria had infiltrated the outer perimeter just after midnight, using the storm as cover. Her original plan had been to follow the maintenance tunnels beneath the factory floor, avoid the guard patrols, and reach the central command center where the intelligence was stored. She had made it halfway through the facility when the EMP device activated, turning her sophisticated equipment into expensive paperweights. Now she found herself trapped in the heart of enemy territory with nothing but her training, her sidearm, and the combat knife strapped to her thigh. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very technology designed to give her an advantage had become her greatest liability. Without her night vision goggles, thermal scope, or communication device, she was reduced to relying on skills that hadn't changed much since humans first learned to fight in the dark. The sound of boots on wet concrete echoed through the cavernous space around her. Maria counted at least 6 different sets of footsteps, moving in a coordinated search pattern that suggested professional training. These weren't street thugs or weekend warriors playing soldier. They moved with the precision and discipline that came from years of real combat experience. She closed her eyes and listened, filtering out the noise of the storm to focus on the subtle sounds that would tell her everything she needed to know about her pursuers. The slight scrape of tactical gear against clothing told her they were wearing full combat loadouts. The measured pace of their steps indicated they were being careful, methodical. They knew she was somewhere in the building, but they hadn't pinpointed her exact location yet. Maria had been a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment before being recruited into special operations, and she had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemy was often the one who underestimated their opponent. The Blackwater operatives were hunting for a disabled piece of high-tech equipment, not realizing they were dealing with someone who had been fighting and winning battles since before some of them had learned to tie their boots. The factory floor was a maze of industrial equipment, shipping containers, and support columns that provided both cover and concealment. Maria had spent the first hour after the EMP blast creating a mental map of the facility, identifying potential escape routes and defensive positions. She had also taken careful note of the guard rotation patterns, the blind spots in their patrol routes, and the locations of security cameras. Without her electronic warfare suite, she had fallen back on tactics that were older than gunpowder. She moved like water, flowing around obstacles and finding the path of least resistance. Every step was calculated to minimize noise, every position chosen to maximize her ability to observe while remaining undetected. She was hunting now, not just trying to escape. The first guard appeared around the corner of a shipping container approximately 30 meters from her position. He was moving with his rifle at the ready, scanning left and right with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this countless times before. Maria could see the outline of his night vision goggles and the infrared laser sight mounted on his weapon. He was well-trained and well-equipped, but he was also predictable. She waited until he had passed her position before moving, staying low, and using the shadows cast by the overhead lighting to mask her approach. The guard was focused on what was ahead of him, not what might be following behind. It was a fundamental tactical error that Maria had seen countless times in combat zones around the world. The concrete floor was slick with condensation from the storm, but Maria had learned to move silently on any surface. She approached the guard from his blind spot, timing her movement to coincide with the sounds of thunder overhead. When she was close enough to smell his aftershave, she struck with the precision of a surgeon and the speed of a striking snake. Her right hand clamped over his mouth while her left arm snaked around his neck, applying pressure to the carotid arteries that would render him unconscious in seconds. The guard struggled briefly, his training kicking in as he tried to break free from the hold, but Maria had perfected this technique through years of practice and real-world application. Within 10 seconds, he was unconscious. She dragged his body behind a nearby crate and quickly stripped him of anything useful. His night vision goggles were compatible with her mounting system, and his radio would give her access to the enemy's communication network. The suppressed pistol in his tactical holster was a welcome addition to her limited arsenal. As she adjusted the night vision goggles, the factory transformed from a dark maze into a green-tinted landscape where every detail was visible. She could see the heat signatures of the remaining guards as they continued their search, apparently unaware that their teammate had been eliminated. Maria activated the captured radio and immediately heard the chatter of the search teams. They were speaking in short, professional bursts that told her they were taking the situation seriously. Someone had noticed that her infiltration had gone beyond the perimeter, and they were conducting a building-by-building sweep to locate the intruder. "Sector 7 clear," came a voice through the radio, "moving to Sector 8. "Copy that, Alpha 2, replied what sounded like a command post operator. "Bravo team, what's your status?" "Still searching the east wing. No contact yet." Maria smiled grimly as she processed the information. They were organized and methodical, but they were also following predictable patterns. Military training was both a strength and a weakness. It made soldiers effective and disciplined, but it also made them creatures of habit who could be anticipated by someone who understood their doctrine. She began moving through the facility with renewed confidence, using the captured night vision equipment to navigate the maze of industrial equipment. The storm outside was intensifying, and the sound of rain and wind provided excellent acoustic cover for her movement. She was no longer the hunted, she had become the hunter. The second guard was isolated in a corridor between two large storage areas, apparently checking a series of doors that led to smaller rooms. Maria observed him for several minutes, noting his movement patterns and the way he cleared each room. He was thorough and professional, but he was also alone and focused on the task in front of him. She approached from behind, using a stack of metal drums to mask her movement. The guard was wearing the same type of tactical gear as his unconscious teammate, and Maria could see the outline of body armor beneath his combat vest. A direct frontal assault would be risky, but she had other options. The guard turned toward her position just as she emerged from behind the drums, but by then it was too late. Maria's combat knife found the gap between his helmet and body armor, severing the spinal cord with surgical precision. He collapsed without making a sound, his weapon clattering against the concrete floor. 2 down, approximately 48 to go. Maria retrieved the guard's equipment and continued deeper into the facility. She was beginning to understand the layout of the compound and the disposition of the defensive forces. The guards were operating in teams of 2 or 3, with regular check-ins to a central command post. They were covering specific sectors and following predetermined routes that could be mapped and exploited. The third encounter came as she was crossing an open area between 2 buildings. A guard appeared at the far end of the space, sweeping his sector with thermal imaging equipment that could detect her body heat even through concealment. Maria immediately dropped prone behind a low concrete barrier and assessed her options. Direct engagement was not advisable in an open area where other guards could converge on her position quickly. Instead, she waited for the guard to complete his sweep and begin moving toward the next sector. When he passed within range, she used her suppressed pistol to eliminate him with a single shot to the head. 3 down. The radio chatter was becoming more urgent, as the guards realized that something was wrong. Check-in times were being shortened, and team leaders were reporting gaps in communication with their subordinates. Maria could hear the tension in their voices as they began to understand that they were dealing with something more dangerous than a simple intruder. "Command, this is Bravo 1, came a voice through the radio. "We've lost contact with Alpha 3 and Alpha 6. Last known positions were sectors 7 and 12. "Copy, Bravo 1, switching to contingency protocol. All teams converge on the central building and establish a defensive perimeter." Maria smiled as she heard the order. They were abandoning their search and falling back to a defensive position, which meant she had achieved a significant psychological advantage. Fear was beginning to work in her favor, making the guards second-guess themselves and abandon their aggressive tactics. But it also meant that her remaining targets would be concentrated in a smaller area, making them harder to isolate and eliminate. The easy pickings were over. From this point forward, every engagement would be more dangerous and more complex. She moved toward the central building, using the captured radio to monitor enemy communications and the night vision goggles to navigate through the increasingly complex maze of defensive positions. The storm was reaching its peak intensity, and visibility was limited even with electronic enhancement. As she approached the central compound, Maria could see the guards repositioning themselves according to their contingency plan. They were creating overlapping fields of fire and establishing communication checkpoints that would make it difficult for an intruder to move undetected. It was a textbook defensive formation that would be nearly impossible to penetrate using conventional tactics. But Maria wasn't planning to use conventional tactics. She had spent years learning to think like her enemies, to anticipate their responses and exploit their weaknesses. The guards were falling back on their training, which made them predictable. They were thinking like soldiers defending a fixed position, not like hunters pursuing a dangerous predator. The fourth guard was positioned on an elevated platform that provided overwatch for the main entrance to the central building. He was equipped with a scoped rifle and thermal imaging equipment that gave him a commanding view of the surrounding area. Taking him out would require careful planning and precise execution. Maria studied his position for nearly 20 minutes, observing his scan patterns and noting the times when his attention was focused on specific sectors. She also identified his backup, a second guard positioned approximately 50 meters away who would respond if the overwatch position was compromised. She circled around to approach the platform from its blind spot, using a series of drainage pipes and maintenance ladders to reach the elevated position without being detected. The climb was treacherous in the rain, but Maria had trained extensively in adverse conditions and was comfortable operating in environments that would challenge most soldiers. When she reached the platform, the guard was focused on his thermal scope, scanning the perimeter for signs of movement. Maria approached from directly behind him, moving with the fluid grace that had made her one of the most effective operators in the Special Forces community. The guard sensed her presence at the last moment and began to turn, but Maria was already moving. Her left hand grabbed his helmet while her right hand drove her combat knife between his ribs, finding the heart with anatomical precision. He died instantly, his body going limp in her arms. 4 down. She appropriated his scoped rifle and took up his position, using the elevated vantage point to observe the enemy disposition. From this height, she could see the entire defensive perimeter and identify the locations of the remaining guards. They had established 3 concentric rings of defense around the central building, with approximately 15 guards in the outer ring, 12 in the middle ring, and the remainder concentrated around the main entrance. The radio crackled with increasingly frantic communications as the guards realized that their overwatch position had been compromised. Teams were being redeployed to cover the gaps in their defensive line, but each adjustment created new opportunities for exploitation. "Command, we've lost Overwatch 1, reported a team leader. "No visual contact, no radio response." "Copy that. Delta Team, move to secure the elevated positions. Charlie Team, expand your perimeter to cover Sector 15. Maria monitored their communications while planning her next move. The guards were becoming reactive rather than proactive, responding to her actions instead of anticipating them. They were losing the initiative, and fear was beginning to affect their decision-making process. She used the scoped rifle to eliminate 2 more guards who were moving to reposition themselves according to the new orders. Both shots were taken at maximum range in adverse weather conditions, requiring her to compensate for wind drift and bullet drop. The guards dropped without knowing what had hit them, their teammates scrambling to identify the source of the accurate fire. 6 down. The enemy response was immediate and intense. Suppressing fire erupted from multiple positions as the remaining guards tried to neutralize what they perceived as a sniper threat. Maria abandoned the elevated position before return fire could zero in on her location, leaving behind the scoped rifle, but taking with her valuable intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities. She made her way back to ground level and began working systematically through the outer defensive ring, using the confusion created by the sniper attack to mask her movement. The guards were focused on external threats and elevated positions, not on the possibility that their enemy was moving among them at ground level. The 7th guard was eliminated while he was focused on scanning rooftops for sniper positions. Maria approached him from a blind spot created by a shipping container and eliminated him with her suppressed pistol before he realized she was there. 7 down. The 8th guard presented a more challenging target. He was positioned with a clear view of multiple approach routes and had a teammate within supporting distance. Maria waited for nearly an hour, studying their routine and looking for an opportunity to separate them or catch them both off guard. Her patience was rewarded when one of the guards left his position to investigate a noise that turned out to be debris blown by the wind. Maria used the brief separation to eliminate the remaining guard with her combat knife, then waited in ambush for his partner to return. When the 2nd guard discovered his teammate's body, he made the mistake of focusing on the immediate threat instead of scanning for the person responsible. Maria eliminated him before he could raise an alarm or call for backup. 9 down. The radio chatter was becoming increasingly desperate as team leaders reported missing personnel and gaps in their defensive coverage. The psychological pressure was building as the guards realized they were being systematically hunted by an opponent who seemed to strike without warning and disappear like smoke. Command, this is Charlie 1. We've lost contact with multiple units. Request permission to fall back to the inner perimeter. Negative, Charlie 1. Maintain your positions. Reinforcements are en route. Maria smiled as she heard the exchange. The command structure was beginning to break down as field commanders lost confidence in their ability to maintain their positions. The mention of reinforcements was concerning, but it also suggested that the enemy was running out of options and falling back on increasingly desperate measures. She continued working through the outer perimeter, using a combination of stealth, precision, and psychological warfare to eliminate guards while avoiding detection. Each successful engagement increased her confidence while simultaneously demoralizing the enemy forces. The 10th guard was eliminated while he was distracted by radio communications with his team leader. Maria approached him during a moment when his attention was focused on his radio rather than his immediate surroundings, eliminating him with a single knife thrust before he could react. 10 down. By the time she had cleared the outer perimeter, Maria had eliminated nearly a quarter of the enemy force and established complete tactical superiority over the remaining defenders. The guards were now operating in a purely reactive mode, responding to her actions rather than implementing their own plan. The middle defensive ring would present greater challenges, as the remaining guards were more concentrated and had better supporting positions. But Maria had gained valuable intelligence about their capabilities and limitations, and she was beginning to understand the psychology of their leadership. As she prepared to assault the middle perimeter, the storm outside began to intensify even further. Lightning illuminated the factory complex in brief, stark flashes that created dramatic shadows and moments of perfect visibility. Thunder rolled across the industrial landscape like artillery fire, masking the sounds of movement and engagement. Maria checked her ammunition and equipment, ensuring that everything was ready for the next phase of her mission. She had proven that technology wasn't everything, that training and experience could overcome numerical superiority and superior equipment. But the hardest part was still ahead of her. The guards in the middle perimeter would be more alert and better positioned than their eliminated teammates. They would have learned from the fate of the outer guards and adjusted their tactics accordingly. Maria would need to be even more creative and aggressive to maintain her advantage. She moved toward the middle perimeter like a force of nature, invisible and inexorable. The storm raged overhead, but inside the factory complex, a different kind of storm was building. Maria Santos had lost her technological advantage, but she had gained something more valuable, the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was trained to do. The hunt continued. The middle perimeter presented a completely different challenge than the outer defenses. Maria crouched behind a concrete barrier, studying the disposition of forces through her captured night vision goggles. The remaining guards had learned from the systematic elimination of their outer ring colleagues and had adapted their tactics accordingly. They were no longer operating as isolated sentries or small patrol teams. Instead, they had formed defensive clusters with overlapping fields of observation and mutually supporting positions. 12 guards remained in the middle ring, arranged in 4 groups of 3. Each group controlled a key approach route to the central building, and their positions were carefully coordinated to eliminate blind spots and dead space. They had also established a communication protocol that required regular check-ins every 5 minutes, making it nearly impossible to eliminate guards without immediately alerting their teammates. Maria spent 40 minutes observing their routine, mapping their communication patterns, and identifying the subtle weaknesses in their defensive arrangement. Military doctrine was both their strength and their vulnerability. They were following textbook defensive procedures, which made them predictable to someone who understood the same doctrine and had experience exploiting its limitations. The storm continued to rage overhead, and Maria realized she could use the weather to her advantage. Lightning strikes were occurring approximately every 30 to 40 seconds, creating brief moments of intense illumination followed by periods of deeper darkness. During the lightning flashes, the guards instinctively focused their attention on areas that had been highlighted by the sudden brightness, creating predictable patterns of distraction. She identified her first target group, positioned near a large industrial crane that dominated the eastern approach to the central building. 3 guards had established a triangular defensive position that provided excellent coverage of their assigned sector, but their arrangement also created an opportunity for someone willing to take significant risks. The crane's support structure included a series of maintenance ladders and platforms that could provide an elevated approach route. It would be dangerous to attempt the climb in the storm, but it would also be unexpected. The guards were focused on ground-level threats and had positioned themselves to repel a conventional assault. Maria began her ascent during a particularly intense period of rainfall that reduced visibility and masked the sound of her movement. The metal rungs of the maintenance ladder were slick with water, and the wind threatened to tear her from her precarious handholds, but she had trained extensively in adverse conditions and was comfortable operating at the edge of human capability. As she climbed, she could hear the guards below conducting their regular radio check-ins. Their voices were tense but professional, indicating they were maintaining discipline despite the psychological pressure of knowing they were being hunted. These were experienced operators who wouldn't be easily intimidated or tricked into making fundamental tactical errors. From her elevated position on the crane platform, Maria could see all 3 guards and their exact positioning. They had established interlocking fields of fire that would make it extremely difficult for a ground-based attacker to approach undetected, but they had not anticipated the possibility of an aerial assault. She waited for the next lightning strike to briefly illuminate the area, causing the guards to instinctively focus their attention on newly visible terrain features. During that moment of distraction, she descended rapidly using a rappelling technique that brought her directly into the center of their defensive triangle. The first guard was eliminated before he could react, Maria's combat knife finding the gap between his helmet and body armor with surgical precision. The second guard began to turn toward the commotion, but Maria was already moving, her suppressed pistol firing twice in rapid succession to neutralize the threat. The third guard had enough time to raise his weapon and attempt to engage, but Maria's training in close quarters combat gave her a decisive advantage. She closed the distance between them in a fraction of a second, deflecting his rifle barrel with her left hand while driving her knife toward his throat with her right. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds from initial contact to final elimination. 3 more guards down, 9 remaining in the middle perimeter. But the brief firefight had not gone entirely unnoticed. Maria heard urgent radio chatter as nearby guard teams responded to the sound of suppressed gunfire and the sudden loss of communication from the eliminated team. "Command, this is Bravo 2. We heard shots from Delta position. No response to radio calls." "Copy, Bravo 2. Charlie team move to investigate. Maintain visual contact with each other." Maria quickly stripped useful equipment from the eliminated guards and prepared to relocate before the investigating team could arrive. She had gained 3 additional magazines for her captured pistol, a fragmentary grenade that could be useful in the right situation, and another radio that would allow her to monitor multiple communication channels simultaneously. As she moved away from the crane position, she could see the lights of the investigating team approaching through the rain. They were moving with appropriate caution, using proper tactical formation and communication protocols. When they discovered the bodies of their teammates, their response would likely involve a significant escalation in defensive measures. Maria positioned herself in concealment approximately 100 meters from the crane, close enough to observe the investigation but far enough away to avoid detection. She watched through her night vision goggles as 6 guards approached the position where she had conducted her assault. The investigating team's reaction to discovering the bodies was immediate and professional. They established a security perimeter, conducted a quick assessment of the scene, and reported their findings to the command post. But Maria could see the psychological impact in their body language and movement patterns. The systematic nature of the kills was clearly having an effect on their morale. "Command, this is Charlie 1. Delta team is KIA, professional work, close quarters engagement. The target is definitely military trained." "Copy, Charlie 1. All remaining units switch to Protocol 7. No one moves alone, maintain constant visual contact." Protocol 7 represented a significant tactical shift. The guards were abandoning their fixed defensive positions and consolidating into larger, more mobile groups. This would make them harder to isolate and eliminate, but it would also reduce their overall coverage and create gaps in their defensive perimeter. Maria analyzed the new situation and identified an opportunity. The consolidation process would require the guards to move from their current positions to new assembly areas, creating windows of vulnerability during the transition. If she could time her attacks correctly, she might be able to eliminate additional guards while they were repositioning. She observed the movement of the remaining 9 guards as they began implementing Protocol 7. 2 groups of 3 guards each were moving toward predetermined rally points, while a third group maintained overwatch from elevated positions. The movement was well coordinated and professional, but any movement creates opportunities for someone positioned to exploit them. Maria selected an intercept point along the route being used by one of the moving groups. She positioned herself behind a large shipping container that provided both concealment and cover, then waited for the guards to pass through her kill zone. The 3 guards approached her position in a tactical column formation, maintaining appropriate spacing and security protocols. They were moving with confidence and alertness, but they were also focused on reaching their destination rather than conducting a detailed search of their route. Maria allowed the lead guard to pass her position, then emerged from concealment to engage the second and third guards simultaneously. Her suppressed pistol eliminated the second guard with 2 shots to the center of mass, while her combat knife found the third guard before he could react to the sudden attack. The lead guard heard the commotion and began to turn back toward his teammates, but Maria was already moving to engage him. The guard was well trained and managed to get his weapon into action, forcing Maria to use evasive movement while closing the distance for a knife engagement. The brief firefight ended with Maria eliminating the third guard, but not before he managed to fire several unsuppressed rounds that echoed across the industrial complex. The sound would immediately alert every remaining guard to her precise location. 12 guards down, 6 remaining in the middle perimeter. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Suppressing fire erupted from multiple positions as the remaining guards attempted to pin her down in the area where the gunfire had originated. Maria was forced to use evasive movement and concealment to avoid being caught in the crossfire, abandoning the equipment she had hoped to recover from the eliminated guards. She sprinted toward better cover as bullets sparked off concrete and metal around her position. The guards were using disciplined fire control, firing in coordinated bursts rather than spraying ammunition wildly. They were attempting to fix her in place so that other teams could maneuver to flanking positions. Maria reached cover behind a massive concrete support column just as the first flanking team began moving to cut off her escape route. She could hear their coordinated movements and professional radio communications as they attempted to execute a textbook encirclement operation. But Maria had anticipated this response and had already identified multiple escape routes from her current position. She used a combination of smoke from the fragmentary grenade she had captured and the natural concealment provided by the storm to break contact and relocate to a new position. The guards spent nearly 20 minutes searching the area where she had conducted her last engagement, but by then she was already positioned to observe their search and plan her next attack. She had gained valuable intelligence about their reaction times and tactical procedures, information that would be crucial for the remaining engagements. The psychological pressure was clearly affecting the remaining guards. Their radio communications revealed increasing tension and uncertainty as they realized they were dealing with an opponent who seemed capable of appearing anywhere and disappearing without trace. The systematic elimination of their teammates was eroding their confidence and making them increasingly reactive rather than proactive. Maria identified her next target as a two-guard team that had been assigned to provide overwatch for the search operation. They were positioned on an elevated platform that gave them an excellent view of the surrounding area, but their focus was concentrated on the zone where she had last been seen rather than on potential threats from other directions. She approached their position using a route that took her through a series of maintenance tunnels beneath the factory floor. The tunnels were partially flooded from the storm, and navigation was difficult without proper lighting, but they provided a means of movement that was completely undetectable from ground level. The tunnel system emerged near the base of the platform, where the Overwatch team was positioned. Maria could hear their radio communications and observe their movement patterns through gaps in the metal grating that covered the tunnel entrance. She waited for a moment when both guards were focused on the same sector, then emerged from the tunnel system directly beneath their position. The platform was supported by a framework of steel girders that provided multiple climbing routes to the guard position. Maria ascended silently, using her combat knife to eliminate both guards before they could react to her presence. The engagements were swift and silent, leaving no time for radio communications or weapons fire. 14 guards down, 4 remaining in the middle perimeter. But her luck was about to change. As she was recovering equipment from the eliminated guards, Maria heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching through the storm. The reinforcements that had been mentioned in earlier radio communications were arriving, and they would significantly alter the tactical situation. Through her night vision goggles, she could see a military transport helicopter approaching the landing zone adjacent to the central building. The aircraft was flying in adverse weather conditions that would challenge even experienced pilots, indicating that the reinforcement operation was being conducted by highly trained personnel. Maria watched as the helicopter touched down and immediately began disgorging additional troops. She counted at least 12 additional soldiers, all equipped with modern military gear and moving with the precision that indicated elite training. These were not the criminal organization's regular security personnel. They appeared to be professional military contractors or special operations veterans. The arrival of reinforcements changed the entire tactical situation. Maria was no longer dealing with a slowly diminishing force of defenders. She now faced a situation where her enemies' numbers were actually increasing. The new arrivals would be fresh, alert, and equipped with the latest technology. She observed as the new troops were briefed by the surviving guards and began establishing an expanded security perimeter. Their tactics were noticeably more sophisticated than those employed by the original defenders, suggesting they had more recent training and better leadership. The reinforcement commander immediately began reorganizing the entire defensive scheme, abandoning the fixed positions that had proven vulnerable and implementing a more dynamic defense based on mobile patrols and rapid response teams. Maria could hear their radio communications as they established new protocols and communication frequencies. All units, this is actual. We're implementing a hunter-killer protocol. 3 teams of 4, rotating search patterns, 15-minute intervals. The hunter-killer protocol was a significant escalation. Instead of trying to defend fixed positions, they were going to actively hunt for her using coordinated teams with overlapping search areas. It was a much more aggressive approach that would severely limit her ability to operate with the freedom she had enjoyed against the original defenders. Maria realized she needed to eliminate the remaining middle perimeter guards quickly before the new teams could fully organize their operations. The 4 surviving guards from the middle ring were now integrated into the expanded defensive scheme, but they were also exhausted from hours of tension and combat stress. She identified an opportunity when 2 of the original guards were assigned to guide one of the new teams through the facility layout. The guides would be focused on navigation and communication rather than security, creating a brief window of vulnerability. Maria intercepted the group as they moved between buildings, using the storm and darkness to mask her approach. She eliminated both original guards with her suppressed pistol before the new troops could react, then used a fragmentary grenade to create confusion and casualties among the reinforcement team. The engagement was brief but intense. Maria eliminated 2 more of the new arrivals before breaking contact and relocating, but she had also revealed her position and capabilities to the enemy commander. The reinforcements would now understand they were dealing with an extremely dangerous opponent who could engage multiple targets simultaneously. 16 guards down, but the enemy force had actually grown larger due to the arrival of reinforcements. The tactical situation had fundamentally changed. Maria was no longer hunting a slowly diminishing force of demoralized defenders. She was now engaged in active combat against a well-led, well-equipped force that outnumbered her approximately 3-1. But she had also learned valuable lessons about their capabilities and limitations. The reinforcements were better trained and equipped than the original guards, but they were also operating in an unfamiliar environment under adverse conditions. They had the advantage of numbers and firepower, but Maria had the advantage of familiarity with the terrain and the initiative that came from having already demonstrated her superiority over their predecessors. As she prepared for the final phase of her mission, Maria reflected on how far she had come from the moment her communications equipment had failed. What had begun as a simple infiltration mission had evolved into an extended combat operation that was testing every aspect of her training and experience. The storm outside was beginning to subside slightly, reducing the acoustic cover that had been so valuable during the earlier phases of the operation. But Maria had adapted her tactics throughout the night, and she was confident she could continue to evolve as the situation demanded. The central building remained her ultimate objective. The intelligence she had been sent to retrieve was still there, waiting for her to complete her mission. But between her current position and that objective stood the most dangerous opponents she had yet faced. The remaining guards from the middle perimeter had been integrated into the new defensive scheme, but Maria had identified their positions and was planning her final assault on this ring of defenders. The 2 surviving guards were positioned with the reinforcement teams, making them harder to isolate, but also giving her the opportunity to eliminate multiple targets in single engagements. She began her final approach to the central building, moving through the shadows like a force of nature. The hunt was far from over, and the most challenging phase still lay ahead. But Maria Santos had proven to herself and her enemies that technology was no substitute for training, experience, and the warrior spirit that had driven her throughout her military career. The night was far from over. The central building loomed ahead like a fortress carved from steel and concrete, its windows dark except for the occasional flicker of emergency lighting that cast eerie shadows across the industrial landscape. Maria Santos pressed herself against the corner of a shipping container, studying the final defensive perimeter that stood between her and the intelligence she had been sent to retrieve. The reinforcements had transformed what remained of the Blackwater Syndicate's security force into a formidable opponent. Where once she had faced tired, demoralized guards following predictable patterns, she now confronted a coordinated defense commanded by someone who clearly understood modern small-unit tactics. Through her night vision goggles, Maria could see the hunter-killer teams conducting their systematic sweeps. 3 groups of 4 soldiers each, moving in coordinated patterns that left no area unsearched for more than a few minutes. Their equipment was state-of-the-art military hardware, and their movement demonstrated the kind of training that took years to develop. But Maria had advantages that her enemies couldn't neutralize with better equipment or superior numbers. She had spent the past 4 hours learning every detail of this facility, understanding its layout, its blind spots, and its tactical characteristics. More importantly, she had been fighting this battle on her terms, choosing when and where to engage while forcing her enemies to react to her initiative. The commander of the reinforcement unit was clearly experienced. Maria had been monitoring their radio communications and could hear the calm, professional tone that indicated someone accustomed to command in combat situations. He had quickly assessed the tactical situation, identified the mistakes made by the original security team, and implemented countermeasures designed to neutralize her advantages. Alpha Team, adjust your search pattern to Grid 7. Bravo Team, maintain overwatch from Building 3. Charlie Team, prepare to leapfrog on my command. The hunter-killer protocol was forcing Maria to remain constantly mobile, never staying in one position long enough to plan detailed attacks on specific targets. Every few minutes, one of the search teams would sweep through her area of operations, forcing her to relocate or risk detection. But the constant movement was also exhausting the search teams. They had been conducting high-intensity operations for over an hour, carrying heavy equipment through difficult terrain in adverse weather conditions. Maria could hear the fatigue beginning to creep into their radio communications, subtle changes in voice patterns and response times that indicated decreasing alertness. She had identified a weakness in their search pattern. The three teams were operating on timed intervals designed to ensure complete coverage of the operational area, but the timing created brief windows when certain zones were unoccupied by any search team. If she could time her movements correctly, she could exploit these gaps to get closer to the central building. Maria waited until Alpha Team had completed its sweep of Grid 7 and begun moving toward Grid 8. As soon as they cleared the area, she sprinted across 50 meters of open ground to reach the cover of a concrete loading dock adjacent to the central building. From this position, she could observe the building's primary entrance and the defensive positions that had been established to protect it. 2 guards from the original security force were positioned at the entrance itself, while 4 reinforcement soldiers occupied elevated positions that provided overwatch for the approaches. The building's design worked in favor of the defenders. There were only 3 ground-level entrances, all of which were clearly visible from multiple defensive positions. The windows on the first floor had been reinforced with steel bars, and the higher floors could only be accessed through the building itself. Maria studied the defensive arrangement for 15 minutes, timing the guard rotations and mapping the blind spots in their coverage. The reinforcement commander had done an excellent job of creating interlocking fields of fire that made a direct assault extremely difficult, but every defensive scheme had vulnerabilities for someone patient enough to find them. She noticed that the guards at the main entrance were required to conduct hourly equipment checks, a routine that temporarily focused their attention on their weapons and communication gear rather than on potential threats. During these checks, their alertness to external threats was slightly diminished. More importantly, the overwatch positions were oriented toward the open approaches to the building, not toward the areas immediately adjacent to the structure itself. If she could get close enough to the building, she might be able to operate in the dead space directly beneath the elevated positions. The next equipment check was scheduled in 8 minutes. Maria used the time to plan her approach route and identify her primary and alternate targets. She would need to eliminate the guards at the main entrance quickly and silently, then deal with the overwatch positions before they could react to the loss of the entrance guards. As the appointed time approached, Maria moved into position at the edge of the dead space beneath the elevated positions. She could hear one of the entrance guards conducting his equipment check, the metallic sounds of weapons being inspected and magazines being seated. She approached the entrance using a drainage ditch that ran along the base of the building, staying below the sight lines of the overwatch positions. The guards at the entrance were focused on their equipment and had temporarily relaxed their external security, exactly as she had anticipated. Maria eliminated the first guard with her combat knife, striking from behind while he was distracted by his radio check. The second guard heard the brief struggle and began to turn toward his partner, but Maria's suppressed pistol fired twice before he could complete the movement. 2 more guards down, but now she faced the more challenging task of neutralizing the Overwatch positions before they could raise an alarm. The elevated positions were approximately 30 meters above ground level, accessible only through internal stairways or external fire escapes. She dragged the bodies of the eliminated guards into the building's entrance alcove, out of sight from the Overwatch positions, then began her assault on the elevated defenders. The building's fire escape was exposed to observation from multiple directions, making a direct climb extremely risky. Instead, Maria entered the building through the main entrance and began working her way up through the internal stairways. The building's layout was typical of industrial construction, with wide corridors and large open spaces designed for moving equipment and materials. The first floor was dark except for emergency lighting, but Maria could hear voices from the upper floors where some of the building's occupants were apparently still conducting business, despite the ongoing security operation. She would need to be careful to avoid civilian casualties while eliminating the remaining guards. The stairway to the second floor was concrete and steel, designed to handle heavy industrial traffic. Maria climbed slowly and silently, pausing at each landing to listen for signs of guard activity. She could hear radio chatter from the floor above, indicating that at least some of the Overwatch positions were located on the second level. As she reached the second floor landing, Maria could see light coming from a room at the end of the corridor. 2 guards were positioned in that room, using it as an observation post to monitor the approaches to the building. They had set up their equipment near the windows and were conducting systematic surveillance of the exterior. Maria approached along the corridor, using the darkness and the sound of the continuing storm to mask her movement. The guards were focused on their external mission and had not positioned anyone to watch the internal approaches to their position. She eliminated both guards with her suppressed pistol, firing through the doorway from a position in the corridor that gave her concealment and cover. The engagement lasted less than 5 seconds, with both guards neutralized before they could react or communicate with their teammates. 4 more guards down, but the sound of suppressed gunfire had been heard by someone else in the building. Maria heard footsteps on the stairway above her, indicating that additional personnel were responding to investigate the disturbance. She positioned herself at the base of the stairway leading to the 3rd floor, using the concrete structure for cover while waiting for the investigating personnel to descend into her kill zone. The footsteps suggested at least 2 people, moving with the careful, deliberate pace of trained soldiers. The first man to appear on the stairway was one of the reinforcement soldiers, moving with his weapon ready and his attention focused downward toward the source of the gunfire. Maria eliminated him with a single shot to the head, then immediately shifted position to engage his partner. The second soldier heard his teammate fall and attempted to retreat back up the stairway, but Maria pursued him, using her superior knowledge of the building layout to cut off his escape route. The engagement ended with the second soldier eliminated in a brief firefight on the 3rd floor landing. 6 more guards down. Maria quickly searched the eliminated soldiers for useful equipment, recovering additional ammunition and a more sophisticated radio that gave her access to the command frequency being used by the reinforcement commander. "Overwatch positions, report status," came the commander's voice through the radio. Maria waited to see if any of the eliminated guards would be expected to respond, but the silence suggested that either their communication schedule was irregular or the commander was beginning to suspect that something had gone wrong. Alpha Team moved to check the building Overwatch positions. Something's not right. The commander's tactical instincts were excellent. He had detected the problem and was moving to investigate before the loss of his Overwatch positions could be exploited. Maria would need to work quickly to complete her mission before Alpha Team arrived to reinforce the building's defenses. She made her way to the 4th floor, where intelligence reports suggested the primary server room was located. The facility's computer systems contained the information she had been sent to retrieve, but she would also need to plant tracking devices on any weapons shipments she could locate. The 4th floor was different from the lower levels. Instead of the industrial spaces she had encountered below, this floor had been converted into office space and technical facilities. Carpeted corridors led to rooms containing computer equipment, filing systems, and communication gear. Maria located the server room using intelligence briefings she had memorized before the mission began. The room was secured with an electronic lock that would normally require specialized equipment to bypass, but the EMP device that had disabled her communication gear had also affected some of the building's electronic systems. She found the server room door standing ajar, apparently left open when the electronic locks failed. Inside, banks of computer equipment hummed quietly in climate-controlled environment. This was the heart of the Blackwater Syndicate's information network, containing records of weapons transactions, client communications, and operational plans. Maria began the process of downloading the information onto portable storage devices she had brought for this purpose. The download would take several minutes, time she would need to defend while avoiding the search teams that were undoubtedly moving to investigate the building. As the download proceeded, she used her radio to monitor the activities of the remaining guards. Alpha Team was approaching the building and would arrive within minutes. She would need to prepare defensive positions and delay their advance long enough to complete her primary mission. The server room had only one entrance, making it easy to defend, but also creating the risk of being trapped if the enemy could establish a strong position in the corridor outside. Maria positioned herself to cover the doorway while maintaining access to the computer systems. She could hear Alpha Team entering the building and beginning their search of the lower floors. They were moving systematically, clearing each room and securing each level before advancing to the next. Their professionalism and discipline were evident in their radio communications and movement patterns. First floor secure. Moving to second floor, multiple friendly KIA professional work. Copy Alpha Team. Maintain security protocols. Target is extremely dangerous. The download was approximately 60% complete when Alpha Team reached the fourth floor. Maria could hear them moving through the corridor, checking each room and office space with the methodical precision of experienced soldiers. She prepared for what would likely be the most challenging engagement of the entire operation. Alpha Team consisted of 4 highly trained soldiers operating in familiar territory with excellent equipment and communication. They knew she was somewhere on the fourth floor, and they would use coordinated tactics to locate and eliminate her. But Maria had chosen her defensive position carefully. The server room's single entrance created a fatal funnel that would force attacking troops to expose themselves to her fire. She had cover and concealment inside the room, while any attackers would be silhouetted in the doorway. The first member of Alpha Team appeared in the corridor outside the server room approximately 3 minutes before the download would be complete. Maria could see him through the partially open door, moving with careful precision as he cleared the adjoining rooms. She waited until he was directly in front of the server room entrance before engaging, her suppressed pistol firing multiple times in rapid succession. The soldier dropped immediately, his body armor unable to protect him from the precision shots fired at close range. The rest of Alpha Team reacted instantly, establishing covering positions and attempting to suppress her with accurate rifle fire. Bullets sparked off the metal server racks around her position, but the room's layout provided multiple positions that offered protection from small arms fire. Alpha 1 is down. Target is in the server room, requesting backup and heavier weapons. Maria smiled grimly as she heard the radio call. The request for heavier weapons suggested that Alpha Team was having difficulty dealing with her defensive position, but it also meant that her tactical situation would deteriorate rapidly if those weapons arrived. She eliminated the second member of Alpha Team when he attempted to use a fragmentary grenade to clear her position. The grenade bounced off the door frame and detonated in the corridor, temporarily disrupting the attackers but failing to achieve the desired effect against her position. With 2 members of Alpha Team eliminated, the remaining soldiers adjusted their tactics and began attempting to maneuver into flanking positions. But the building's layout limited their options, and Maria had positioned herself to cover all possible approaches to the server room. The download reached completion just as the third member of Alpha Team attempted a direct assault on her position. Maria eliminated him with her combat knife as he tried to enter the server room, but not before he managed to wound her with a burst of automatic weapons fire. The wound was superficial, a grazing hit across her left shoulder that would limit her mobility but wouldn't prevent her from continuing the mission. She had been wounded in combat before, and knew how to manage pain and maintain effectiveness despite injury. The final member of Alpha Team was more cautious than his eliminated teammates, maintaining a position in the corridor where he could observe the server room entrance without exposing himself to direct fire. He was clearly waiting for the requested backup to arrive before attempting another assault. Maria used the temporary lull to complete her intelligence gathering and prepare for her extraction from the building. She had obtained the information she had been sent to retrieve, but she still needed to plant tracking devices on the weapons shipments and find a way to escape from a building that was surrounded by hostile forces. The sound of additional troops entering the building confirmed that the backup requested by Alpha Team was arriving. Maria estimated that she now faced at least 8 fresh soldiers in addition to the surviving member of Alpha Team and whatever remained of the original security force. But she had completed her primary mission and had demonstrated that even overwhelming odds could be overcome by superior training, tactical intelligence, and the kind of warrior spirit that couldn't be taught in any military school. The final phase of her mission would be the most dangerous yet, but Maria Santos had already proven that she was exactly where she belonged. The sound of boots thundering up the concrete stairwell echoed through the building like approaching storm clouds. Maria Santos finished securing the downloaded intelligence data in her tactical vest, the precious information that had cost so many lives to obtain now safely stored in waterproof containers designed to survive the most extreme conditions. Her left shoulder throbbed where the grazing bullet had torn through muscle and skin, but she had experienced worse wounds during her years in special operations. The injury would slow her down and limit her range of motion, but it wouldn't prevent her from completing her mission. Pain was just another tactical factor to be managed and overcome. Through the server room's doorway, she could see the surviving member of Alpha Team maintaining his position in the corridor, his weapon trained on her location while he waited for backup to arrive. He was displaying exactly the kind of tactical patience and discipline that made elite soldiers so dangerous. Rather than rushing into a trap, he was content to contain her until overwhelming force could be brought to bear. The backup forces were making their approach with professional caution, clearing each floor systematically rather than rushing to the scene. Maria could hear their radio communications as they coordinated their movements and prepared for what they expected would be a final assault on her position. Bravo Team in position on 3rd floor, Charlie Team establishing perimeter outside building, Delta Team preparing for assault on 4th floor. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Maria was essentially trapped in a room with one exit, facing an unknown number of heavily armed opponents who were coordinating their attack with military precision. Any conventional tactical analysis would conclude that her position was hopeless. But Maria had never been conventional in her approach to impossible situations. Her entire career had been built on finding solutions that others couldn't see, exploiting opportunities that existed only for someone willing to accept extraordinary risks in pursuit of mission success. She studied the server room more carefully, looking for tactical advantages that hadn't been apparent during her initial assessment. The room contained not only computer equipment, but also the building's primary communication and power distribution systems. Banks of electrical panels lined one wall, while communication cables ran through conduits that connected to every floor of the building. More importantly, she noticed that the room had a secondary ventilation system designed to manage the heat generated by the computer equipment. The ventilation ducts were large enough to provide an alternative escape route, assuming she could access them without being detected by the guards in the corridor. Maria began implementing a plan that would have been rejected as too risky by any reasonable tactical assessment. She would use the building's infrastructure against its defenders, creating enough chaos and confusion to mask her escape, while simultaneously completing the secondary objectives of her mission. The electrical panels controlled power distribution throughout the facility. By selectively disabling certain circuits, she could plunge key areas into darkness while maintaining power to others, creating a pattern of illumination that would confuse and disorient the attacking forces. She began manipulating the electrical systems, using her technical training to identify the circuits that controlled lighting in the stairwells and corridors. Within minutes, she had created a configuration that would give her significant tactical advantages during the coming engagement. The ventilation system access panel was located behind a bank of servers that would provide concealment while she worked to open it. The panel was secured with standard industrial fasteners that could be removed with tools from her tactical kit, but the process would take several minutes and would generate noise that might alert the guards in the corridor. Maria timed her work to coincide with the sounds of the backup teams moving through the building below. Every time she heard boots on the stairwell or radio chatter in the corridor, she would pause her work and prepare to defend her position if necessary. The access panel finally came free just as Delta Team reached the 4th floor and began coordinating with the surviving member of Alpha Team for their final assault. Maria could hear their tactical discussion as they planned their attack on her position. Multiple entry points, flashbang grenades first, then coordinated assault from 3 directions. Negative, too much valuable equipment in that room. Use gas instead. Force her out into the corridor where we can engage her safely. The mention of gas concerned Maria significantly. Tear gas would force her out of her defensive position and into the corridor where the superior numbers and firepower of her enemies would quickly overwhelm her. She needed to act before they could implement their plan. She triggered the electrical modifications she had prepared, plunging the 4th floor corridor into complete darkness while maintaining emergency lighting in selected areas that would create shadows and blind spots favorable to her movement. The sudden loss of lighting caused immediate confusion among the attacking forces. What the hell powers out in the corridor? Emergency lighting only. She's messing with the building systems. Maintain positions. Don't let the darkness affect your discipline. But discipline was only effective when it could be applied systematically, and Maria had disrupted their ability to coordinate their movements effectively. She could hear them stumbling in the darkness, trying to maintain their tactical formation while dealing with an environment that had suddenly become unpredictable. Maria entered the ventilation system just as the first-tier gas canister was deployed into the server room. The gas began filling the space immediately, but she was already crawling through the ventilation ducts toward an exit point that would place her behind the attacking forces. The ductwork was cramped and uncomfortable, especially with her wounded shoulder, but it provided a means of movement that her enemies couldn't anticipate or counter. She followed the building's blueprints that she had memorized during her mission briefing, navigating toward a ventilation grate that opened into a storage room on the opposite side of the 4th floor. As she moved through the ducts, she could hear the confusion and frustration of the forces that were discovering her abandoned position. The gas had done its job of clearing the server room, but finding an empty space instead of a trapped enemy was clearly not what they had expected. Target not in server room. Repeat, target not in server room. How is that possible? We had the room under constant observation. Search the entire floor. She's got to be here somewhere. Maria reached the storage room ventilation grate just as Delta Team began their systematic search of the 4th floor. She could hear them kicking in doors and clearing rooms with the methodical precision of experienced soldiers, but their search pattern was based on the assumption that she was still somewhere on the 4th floor. The storage room was filled with office supplies and equipment, providing excellent concealment for someone who needed to remain undetected, while armed forces conducted a room-by-room search nearby. Maria positioned herself where she could observe the corridor through the partially open door while remaining invisible to anyone conducting a hasty search. Delta Team reached the storage room approximately 10 minutes after beginning their systematic search. The team leader approached the door with appropriate caution, but he was clearly expecting to find either an empty room or someone hiding among the stored materials. He was not expecting to encounter someone who had positioned herself specifically to exploit his entry into the room. Maria eliminated him with her combat knife as he stepped through the doorway, then immediately engaged his teammates as they reacted to his sudden disappearance. The engagement was brief but intense. 3 members of Delta Team were eliminated in less than 15 seconds, but the 4th soldier managed to escape back into the corridor and raise an alarm before Maria could prevent his communication. Delta 1 is down. Target is in the storage room, engaging now. The tactical situation had changed dramatically. Instead of being trapped in the server room, Maria was now mobile and operating in an environment where her enemy's superior numbers were less advantageous. The building's layout created numerous opportunities for ambush and evasion that she could exploit. But she was also running low on ammunition and facing an enemy force that was learning from each engagement. The survivors would adjust their tactics and become increasingly difficult to surprise or outmaneuver. Maria needed to complete her secondary mission objectives and find an escape route before the remaining forces could reorganize and mount a coordinated response. The weapons storage areas were located on the third floor, and she still needed to plant tracking devices on the shipments before her mission could be considered complete. She moved toward the stairwell, using the darkness created by her electrical sabotage to mask her movement. The emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to navigate while creating shadows that offered concealment from anyone searching for her. The third floor presented new challenges. This was where the Blackwater Syndicate stored their weapons inventory, and the layout was different from the office spaces above. Large open areas were filled with crates and shipping containers, creating a maze-like environment that could either provide excellent concealment or become a trap, depending on how it was used. Maria could hear search teams moving through the building below, their communications indicating growing frustration as they failed to locate her despite their superior numbers. The psychological advantage was shifting in her favor as the hunters began to feel like the hunted. All teams sound off. Where is she? Bravo team, third floor east wing clear. Charlie team, second floor clear. Echo team, perimeter secure. No external movement detected. The radio chatter revealed that additional forces had arrived and were now participating in the search. Maria estimated that she was facing at least 15 to 20 enemies, all of whom were trained soldiers with modern equipment and good leadership. But numbers meant nothing if they couldn't be effectively coordinated, and the building's layout severely limited the ability of large forces to operate efficiently. In the confined spaces and complex terrain of the industrial facility, individual skill and tactical intelligence were more important than firepower and manpower. Maria located the weapons storage area using the intelligence briefing she had studied before the mission. Row upon row of wooden crates contained small arms, ammunition, and military equipment that the Blackwater Syndicate was preparing to sell to the highest bidder. She began planting tracking devices on selected shipments, small electronic transmitters that would allow intelligence agencies to monitor the movement of these weapons after they left the facility. Each device was designed to be undetectable during routine inspections, while providing precise location data for months or years. As she worked, Maria could hear the search teams moving through other areas of the third floor. Their search pattern was becoming more systematic and thorough, as they adjusted their tactics to account for her mobility and evasive capabilities. She had planted tracking devices on 6 different weapons shipments when she heard footsteps approaching the storage area where she was working. A search team was conducting a methodical sweep of the third floor, and they would reach her location within minutes. Maria positioned herself in an ambush configuration among the weapons crates, using the maze-like arrangement of containers to create multiple firing positions and escape routes. She had learned the layout of the storage area while planting the tracking devices, giving her a significant advantage over anyone entering the space for the first time. The search team consisted of 4 soldiers moving in a tactical formation designed for clearing complex terrain. They entered the storage area with appropriate caution, but they were focused on finding a hiding enemy rather than anticipating an active ambush. Maria eliminated the first soldier as he passed her concealed position, then used the confusion created by his sudden death to engage his teammates from multiple positions. She moved constantly, never firing more than 2 shots from any single location before relocating to a different position. The engagement lasted nearly 5 minutes as the surviving members of the search team attempted to locate and engage an enemy who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Maria used her superior knowledge of the terrain and her mobility to maintain tactical advantage despite being outnumbered. When the firing stopped, 3 more enemy soldiers had been eliminated, but Maria had also expended most of her remaining ammunition. She had enough bullets for 1 more engagement, possibly 2 if she was extremely careful with her shot placement. The elimination of another search team would certainly trigger a massive response from the remaining enemy forces. Maria needed to find an escape route, and implement her extraction plan before the building became completely saturated with hostile troops. She had identified a potential escape route during her initial reconnaissance of the facility. A maintenance tunnel system connected the central building to other structures in the complex, providing a means of movement that would be difficult for large forces to monitor or control. The tunnel entrance was located in the basement level, requiring her to descend 2 floors while avoiding the search teams that were undoubtedly converging on the 3rd floor in response to the latest engagement. The stairwells would be covered by overwatch positions, making direct movement extremely dangerous. But Maria had noticed that the building's elevator system was still functional despite the power modifications she had made to the lighting circuits. The elevators would provide a means of rapid movement between floors, while avoiding the stairwells where enemy forces were concentrated. She made her way to the elevator bank, moving through the maze of weapons crates while listening to the increasingly frantic radio communications of the search teams. The discovery of more dead soldiers was clearly having a significant psychological impact on the remaining enemy forces. "Command, we've lost another team. This target is extremely dangerous. Request immediate reinforcement." "Reinforcements are already en route. Maintain security protocols and continue the search. She's trapped in the building." "Roger, Command, but she's picking us off one team at a time. We need a different approach." Maria smiled grimly as she heard the exchange. The enemy commander was beginning to understand that conventional tactics were not effective against an opponent who refused to fight conventionally. But understanding a problem was not the same as solving it. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that seemed almost absurdly normal in the context of the deadly game being played throughout the building. Maria stepped inside and selected the basement level, knowing that this could be her last opportunity to complete her mission successfully. As the elevator descended, she reflected on how far she had come since her communication equipment had failed at the beginning of the mission. What had started as a simple infiltration operation had become a complex combat engagement that had tested every aspect of her training and experience. But she had adapted and overcome every challenge, proving that technology was no substitute for the human qualities that made an elite soldier: intelligence, determination, and the warrior spirit that refused to accept defeat regardless of the odds. The basement level awaited, and with it, the final phase of her mission. The elevator doors opened with a quiet hiss, revealing the basement level of the central building bathed in the harsh white light of industrial fluorescent fixtures. Maria Santos stepped into the corridor, her wounded shoulder protesting with each movement, but her mind sharp and focused on the final phase of her mission. The basement was different from the floors above. Here, the industrial nature of the facility was more apparent, with exposed pipes, electrical conduits, and mechanical equipment creating a maze of potential cover and concealment. The air was thick with the smell of machine oil and dampness, and the sound of ventilation fans created a constant background noise that would help mask her movement. Maria could hear the frantic search operations continuing on the floors above her. Radio chatter indicated that the enemy forces were becoming increasingly desperate as they realized their numerical advantage was being systematically neutralized by an opponent who seemed to anticipate their every move. "All teams converge on 3rd floor. Target was last seen in weapons storage area." "Command, we've lost contact with Delta Team. Repeat, Delta Team is not responding." "Understood. Implement Containment Protocol Alpha. Seal all exits and conduct floor-by-floor clearing operations." Containment Protocol Alpha represented the enemy commander's acknowledgement that conventional hunter-killer tactics were failing. Rather than trying to hunt her down, they were going to trap her inside the building and systematically eliminate every possible hiding place until they found her. It was a sound, tactical decision that would have been effective against a conventional opponent, but Maria was no longer where they expected her to be. While they focused their efforts on the upper floors, she was in the basement, implementing her own plan for mission completion and extraction. She located the maintenance tunnel system using the intelligence briefings she had memorized weeks ago. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in what appeared to be a storage alcove filled with cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. The tunnel itself was approximately 4 feet in diameter, just large enough for a person to crawl through while carrying essential equipment. It had been constructed as part of the facility's original design to allow maintenance access between buildings without disrupting operations on the main floors. But before entering the tunnel system, Maria had one final task to complete. The intelligence data she had downloaded from the server room needed to be transmitted to her handlers, ensuring that the mission would be considered successful even if she didn't survive the extraction process. She activated a backup communication device that had been shielded from the EMP blast by special protective casing. The device was designed for emergency use and had limited range, but it would be sufficient to establish contact with the extraction team that should be waiting outside the facility's perimeter. Phoenix Base, this is Raven. Mission primary objectives complete, requesting immediate extraction. The response came through clearly despite the interference from the building's steel and concrete structure. Raven, Phoenix Base, confirm mission status and current position. Intelligence package secured, tracking devices deployed. Currently in basement level of target building. Enemies number approximately 15, well-trained and equipped. Will attempt extraction through southern tunnel system. Copy Raven, extraction team standing by at Rally Point Charlie. Be advised, enemy reinforcements approaching facility from multiple directions. The news of additional enemy reinforcements was concerning, but not unexpected. The Blackwater Syndicate would not allow this level of penetration to go unanswered, and they undoubtedly had the resources to bring overwhelming force to bear on the facility. Maria uploaded the intelligence data through the emergency communication link, ensuring that the information would reach its intended recipients regardless of what happened to her during the extraction process. The upload took nearly 5 minutes, during which she could hear the search operations above becoming increasingly systematic and thorough. With the data transmission complete, she entered the tunnel system and began the arduous crawl toward the exit point that would take her outside the building's defensive perimeter. The tunnel was cramped and uncomfortable, especially with her wounded shoulder, but it provided a means of escape that her enemies couldn't effectively monitor or control. The crawl through the tunnel took nearly 20 minutes, with Maria navigating by compass and counting distance to ensure she was moving in the correct direction. The tunnel was completely dark except for the small flashlight she used sparingly to check her progress, and the air was stale and difficult to breathe. As she neared the exit point, Maria could hear sounds from the surface that indicated significant enemy activity. Vehicles were moving through the area, and she could distinguish the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors that suggested aerial surveillance was being employed. The tunnel exit was located in a drainage ditch approximately 300 meters from the central building, concealed beneath a metal grating that appeared to be part of the facility's storm water management system. Maria approached the exit carefully, listening for signs of enemy presence before exposing herself to observation. Through the grating, she could see that the immediate area was unoccupied, but vehicle lights in the distance indicated that security patrols were active throughout the facility. The extraction would require careful timing and movement to avoid detection by the expanded enemy forces. Maria emerged from the tunnel system and immediately took cover in the drainage ditch while assessing the tactical situation. She could see at least 3 patrol vehicles moving through the facility, their searchlights sweeping systematically across potential hiding places and escape routes. The extraction point was located approximately 1 kilometer from her current position, requiring movement across open terrain that would expose her to observation and engagement. But she had advantages that the patrolling forces couldn't neutralize: superior knowledge of the terrain, experience in evasion and escape techniques, and the element of surprise that came from appearing where she wasn't expected to be. She began moving toward the extraction point, using the natural features of the landscape and the facility's infrastructure to mask her movement from the patrol vehicles. Every few hundred meters, she would pause to observe the enemy search patterns and plan her next movement segment. The wound in her shoulder was becoming increasingly painful and limiting her range of motion, but Maria had learned long ago to compartmentalize physical discomfort and continue functioning despite injury. Pain was just another tactical factor to be managed alongside enemy forces, terrain challenges, and time constraints. Approximately halfway to the extraction point, Maria encountered her first patrol. A vehicle with 4 armed soldiers was conducting a systematic search of the area she needed to cross, using thermal imaging equipment and powerful spotlights to detect any movement or heat signatures. She waited in concealment for nearly 30 minutes, studying their search pattern and looking for an opportunity to bypass their position undetected. The patrol was thorough and professional, but they were also predictable in their movements and timing. When the patrol vehicle moved to search a different sector, Maria sprinted across the open area and reached cover on the opposite side. She had been exposed for less than 15 seconds, but in that time she had covered nearly 200 meters of dangerous terrain. The extraction point was a wooded area beyond the facility's main perimeter, where her support team would be waiting with transportation and medical assistance. As she approached the final phase of her movement, Maria could see lights through the trees that indicated friendly forces were in position. But between her current location and the extraction point, one final challenge awaited. A security checkpoint had been established on the access road that led to the wooded area, with at least 6 guards conducting inspections of all vehicles and personnel attempting to enter or leave the area. The checkpoint represented a significant obstacle that couldn't be bypassed using stealth alone. The guards were positioned to cover all approaches to the wooded area, and their thermal imaging equipment would detect her body heat even if she managed to avoid visual detection. Maria realized she would need to create a diversion that would draw the guards away from their positions long enough for her to slip past the checkpoint undetected. She still had one fragmentary grenade remaining from her captured equipment, and the facility's fuel storage tanks were located approximately 400 meters from the checkpoint. She made her way to the fuel storage area, using her remaining ammunition to puncture several storage tanks and create a pool of flammable liquid. The grenade would ignite the fuel and create a significant explosion and fire that would certainly attract the attention of every security force in the area. Maria positioned the grenade with a delay fuse that would give her time to reach the checkpoint before the explosion occurred. As she moved toward her final objective, she could hear the continued search operations in the central building, where enemy forces were still trying to locate an opponent who was no longer there. The explosion lit up the night sky with a brilliant orange fireball that was visible for miles. The sound rolled across the facility like thunder, and secondary explosions from adjacent storage tanks created a spectacular display that immediately drew every available security resource. The guards at the checkpoint abandoned their positions and raced toward the fire, leaving their thermal imaging equipment unmanned and their coverage of the approach routes temporarily compromised. Maria used the confusion and distraction to slip past the checkpoint and reach the wooded area where her extraction team was waiting.